You don't belong in that seat. Those 6 words. That is where it started. Not with a mechanical failure. Not with a storm rolling in off the Atlantic. Not with any of the 1,000 legitimate reasons a flight can be delayed or rerouted or canceled. It started with 6 words spoken by a woman in a pressed uniform with gold wings on her lapel, spoken to a 24-year-old man who had done nothing wrong except exist in a space she had decided he didn't deserve. 12 minutes. That is all it took. 12 minutes from the moment Jordan Adeyemi was escorted off Meridian Airways Flight 447 at JFK International Airport to the moment $1.7 billion in airline assets froze solid. Not a glitch, not a server error, not a misunderstanding between accountants. A deliberate, precise, and total financial shutdown initiated by a single phone call made from a jetway by a young man in a gray hoodie who didn't raise his voice once. This is that story. It was a Tuesday in early November, the kind of morning that makes New York feel like a city trying to shake itself awake. The sky over JFK was the color of old pewter low clouds pressing down on the tarmac, where ground crews in neon vests moved in careful choreography around the belly of a Dreamliner. The air smelled of jet fuel and the distant promise of rain. Somewhere beyond the runways, the Atlantic waited. Inside Terminal 7, Gate 31, Meridian Airways, Flight 447 to London Heathrow was boarding. First class had opened 8 minutes earlier, and the cabin was already settling into the particular quiet of people who expected to be comfortable. It was that specific silence of expensive things, the soft thud of overhead bins closing on designer luggage, the crinkle of a cashmere blanket being unfolded, the low clink of a pre-departure champagne glass being set on an armrest. The air inside smelled of leather conditioning and someone's heavy woody cologne. The flight attendants moved with practiced efficiency. Victoria Hale, the lead purser, stood near the forward galley organizing service carts with the focused precision of someone who had performed this exact routine 300 times a year for the last 16 years. She wore her dark blonde hair pulled into a perfect chignon, not a strand out of place. Her uniform, the deep navy of Meridian's brand, fit with the sharp tailoring of someone who had chosen it deliberately, the fitted jacket cinched at the waist, the skirt cut just above the knee. Her heels were black, low-pointed, and they made a particular sound on the cabin floor that passengers learned quickly to recognize authoritative, unhurried final. Victoria Hale ran her cabin the way certain people run rooms. She didn't shout, she didn't need to. She established order through a particular quality of attention. She noticed everything cataloged, everything, made assessments the moment each passenger stepped through the door. She had a system. Most flight attendants developed something like it after enough years at 35,000 feet. A fast read of the passenger. A split-second sorting. Priority or peripheral. Asset or inconvenience. She was good at it. She had never in 16 years of flying questioned her own accuracy. This morning she glanced toward seat 1A. Her system activated immediately. She noted the hoodie. Gray, slightly oversized drawstring loose. She noted the joggers, dark clean but casual. She noted the sneakers, the kind that had been broken in on actual pavement rather than purchased for their aesthetic. She noted the backpack, ordinary canvas, not branded. She noted the book resting on one knee, thick, academic-looking, held open with one hand, while the other rested on the armrest, with the particular stillness of someone who was completely at ease. She noted last the young man's face, 20-something, high cheekbones, dark skin, an expression that gave away nothing. Victoria Hale's system produced its assessment. She was already moving before the thought had fully formed. Behind her, the boarding continued. Business-class passengers filed in. The plane filled with the sounds of Tuesday morning travel phones, silenced bags, stowed seatbelts clicked into place. Gate 31 hummed with the low-frequency energy of 212 people about to leave the country. None of them knew that the morning was about to produce a story that would be watched 47 million times. None of them except one person who was quietly reading page 112 of a book about corporate valuation and who had absolutely no intention of letting anyone rewrite the last chapter. Jordan Adeyemi had chosen seat 1A 3 weeks before the flight on a quiet Sunday afternoon in the apartment he shared with his roommate in Crown Heights, Brooklyn. He had opened the Meridian app, selected the fare, $12,000 charged to a card issued by Adeyemi Holdings that he was allowed to use for travel, and selected the window seat without hesitation. He liked window seats. He liked watching the ground pull away. He was 24 years old. He was 6 feet 2 inches tall. He had been flying first class since he was 16 when his grandfather decided it was time Jordan learned how to move through the world without apologizing for the space he occupied. The lesson had not come easily. The first time a gate agent at O'Hare had asked if he was sure he was in the right line. The second time, a flight attendant had helpfully suggested he might be more comfortable in economy. The third time, a man in the seat next to him had asked twice to see his boarding pass before finally nodding as though granting permission. After the third time, his grandfather had taken Jordan's face in both hands and said something Jordan still heard clearly on mornings like this one. "They will try to make you feel like the doubt belongs to you. It doesn't. It's theirs. You carry nothing of theirs." Jordan thought about that now, sitting in seat 1A with the boarding pass resting on the armrest and his book open on his lap. He was reading a chapter on the valuation of leveraged assets, something his grandfather had assigned him to understand before their meeting in London. Raymond Adeyemi did not give casual reading suggestions. Every book was a lesson. Every trip was a preparation. Jordan had highlighted 3 paragraphs in yellow. He had made notes in the margins in his tight, slanted handwriting. He was genuinely absorbed. He was also somewhere beneath that absorption aware of how he looked in this space. He was always aware of it. Not anxious, he had moved past anxious years ago. Just aware. The way a person becomes aware of a particular temperature in a room. You don't panic about it. You register it, and you decide how to stand. He had decided a long time ago to stand straight. The cabin around him filled. The woman in seat 2B arrived first, mid-40s blonde highlights, the kind of unhurried confidence that came from never having been asked to prove she belonged anywhere. She didn't glance at Jordan. She pulled out her phone, angled it for a photo of the champagne, and posted it before the cabin door had finished cycling passengers. The man in seat 3A arrived next, Owen Gallagher, though Jordan didn't know his name yet. Late 30s business casual laptop already in hand, the particular purposeful expression of someone who intended to work through the flight. He dropped into his seat, opened the laptop, and began typing immediately. Seat 2C was taken by a teenage girl with dark eyes and a silver nose ring, carrying an oversized tote bag and balancing what appeared to be a very large iced coffee. She had her phone propped in the crook of her arm, speaking quietly in Spanish into the camera, in what Jordan recognized as the low-key commentary of a creator who filmed everything as a matter of course. She wasn't broadcasting. She was just recording. A habit, like breathing. Jordan registered none of this as suspicious or significant. He registered it the way you register whether factual present, not yet meaningful. He turned back to his book. Page 113. A diagram of a credit facility structure showing the relationship between a primary lender, a subsidiary holding company, and a portfolio of leased assets. Jordan traced the lines with one finger following the money. This was the part his grandfather loved. Not the glamour of the deal, the architecture of it. The hidden load-bearing walls. He could hear his grandfather's voice. "Understand where the real weight rests, Jordan. Everything else is decoration." He bent the corner of the page. He would come back to that diagram. He had no idea how soon it would become relevant. "Excuse me." The heels stopped beside seat 1A. Jordan finished the sentence he was reading. He marked his place with one finger and looked up. Victoria Hale stood in the aisle with the particular posture of someone who had never found it necessary to soften an approach. She was smiling. The smile was the technical surface-level variety, the kind assembled from years of customer service training and maintained by professional discipline. It did not reach her eyes, which were pale blue and moving over Jordan with a speed and thoroughness that was almost clinical. "Can I take a look at your boarding pass?" she said. Her voice was smooth and unhurried, the way still water is smooth before something moves beneath it. Jordan reached for the pass on the armrest. He handed it up without sitting forward. Victoria took it. She examined it. She turned it over. She examined it again. She looked at Jordan. She looked at the pass. She typed something into the tablet she was carrying with her other hand, scrolling and squinting slightly at the screen. She said. Jordan waited. "There seems to be a small discrepancy in our manifest," Victoria said. "Your name isn't pulling up correctly in our system." "I booked this seat 3 weeks ago," Jordan said. His voice was even, not defensive, just factual. "I'm sure you did," Victoria said. And the "I'm sure you did" was the most revealing thing she had said so far, because it had the precise intonation of someone who was not sure at all, and wanted you to know that without saying it directly. Sometimes the system has difficulty reconciling payments made through third-party accounts. It's a known issue. What I'd like to do is move you temporarily to business class while we sort it out. It's just 2 rows back, and honestly, the seats are very... "The payment wasn't through a third party," Jordan said. "I booked directly through the Meridian app." The card cleared immediately. Victoria's smile remained in position. "It's really just a verification issue," she said. "It won't take long to resolve, and we can have you back up here before I would prefer to stay in the seat I paid for," Jordan said. He said it the way someone states a fact about geography. Calm, accurate, not negotiable. Victoria looked at him for a moment. The smile recalibrated. She tucked the boarding pass under her arm and turned toward the galley with the measured movement of someone changing strategies rather than retreating. Jordan returned to his book. He had read 4 more sentences when the heels returned. This time they were accompanied by a heavier sound. Dress shoes. Slow, deliberate, the walk of a man accustomed to entrances. Preston Albright arrived at the front of first class the way certain men arrive everywhere, occupying the space before they are fully in it, announcing their presence through the particular density of their entitlement. He was 58 years old and looked it in the face, but not in the posture. The navy suit was bespoke. The watch on his left wrist was a Patek Philippe. His silver hair was groomed with the precision of a man who employed someone for that purpose. His face was flushed in the specific way of someone who had helped himself to a drink in the lounge and found it both deserved and insufficient. He looked at seat 1A. Then he looked at the person in seat 1A. Something moved across his face. Not surprise, exactly. More like irritation encountering an obstacle it hadn't anticipated and was now calculating how to remove. "That's my seat," he said. Not to Jordan specifically. More in the general direction of Victoria, as if Jordan were an object that had been placed incorrectly. Jordan looked up from his book. "I don't think so," he said. His voice was quiet. "My boarding pass says 1A. Preston's jaw tightened. He turned to Victoria with the full weight of a man who had spent 30 years having things arranged for him. "Is there a manifest issue here or something?" he said. "I fly this route every week. This is my seat." From seat 3, a Owen Gallagher looked up from his laptop. His eyes moved from Preston to Jordan to the boarding pass still visible on Jordan's armrest. He said nothing yet. But he closed the laptop. Mia Torres in seat 2C had stopped speaking into her camera. She set her coffee down very carefully. Her thumb found the record button on her phone. Victoria stepped slightly forward, positioning herself between the 2 men in the way of someone managing a situation she believed she could control. "Mr. Albright, She said we're working on a verification issue with one of the seats. I was just in the process of addressing it. Preston pulled at his cuffs. He looked at Jordan the way he might look at a parking ticket, as something inherently absurd that nonetheless required disposal. Well, address it, he said. Jordan turned a page. The cabin had gone very quiet. Preston Albright set his carry-on down with a thud that was slightly louder than necessary and folded his arms across his chest. He was not a man who stood in aisles. Aisles were for other people. He stood in them with the specific energy of someone counting the seconds until the problem resolved in his favor. I spend $4 million a year with this airline, Preston said. His voice had risen just enough to be heard in the first 3 rows without being technically classified as a shout. $4 million. Annual. I have a diamond status. I have flown this exact route every week for 6 years. And this, he gestured toward Jordan with a short, dismissive wave of his hand, is not how this works. Owen Gallagher set his laptop on his tray table. He leaned slightly forward. Have you actually looked at his boarding pass? Owen said. His voice was conversational, the mild tone of someone raising a practical point at a meeting. Preston looked at Owen the way he looked at people who interrupted him in meetings, as if they had made a category error. This isn't a group discussion, Preston said. I'm just noting that the boarding pass on that armrest clearly says 1A, Owen said. That seems like the most direct relevant evidence before anything else is decided. Preston turned fully to Victoria. The message was clear: manage the audience. Victoria looked at Owen with a professional smile that communicated very crisply that his input was not required. Then she turned back to Jordan. Sir, I want to find a solution that works for everyone here, she said. We have a premium business seat available in row 5. It has a lie-flat option dedicated service, and I can issue a full fare differential credit of, I'm in the seat I purchased, Jordan said. He still hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't moved. He was sitting with one knee crossed over the other, the book resting on his thigh, his expression the same neutral calm it had been since Victoria first approached. Preston exhaled sharply through his nose. Look, he said, dropping the volume slightly in the way of someone choosing to be reasonable as a last resort. I don't know how you ended up in that seat. Maybe there was a system error. Maybe something got wired wrong. But I am telling you, man to man, I need that seat. I have a bad back. I need the bulkhead position. I've had this arrangement for years. Now, I am going to be very calm about this. I am asking you to do the right thing here and move to the seat this very nice woman is offering you. The cabin was fully alert now. The woman in 2B had lowered her phone. A man in 4C had turned in his seat. The sounds of boarding from business class had quieted people. There could sense the particular atmospheric pressure change of a confrontation they couldn't quite see. Jordan looked at Preston. What kind of passenger, Jordan said quietly, do you think ends up in first class by mistake? Preston blinked. The question hung there. Not aggressive. Genuine. Clear. Preston's color deepened. He looked at Victoria. She looked at him. Something passed between them, the unspoken agreement of 2 people who have arrived at the same conclusion for the same reason and would both rather not say it out loud. I'm not saying anything except that I want my seat, Preston said. His voice had taken on a harder edge now, the reasonableness gone. Victoria, please. Victoria straightened her spine. She turned to Jordan with the expression of someone who had made a decision they intended to stand behind. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to cooperate with our relocation request. Mr. Albright is a long-standing priority member, and his reservation indicates his reservation for which seat, Jordan said. Victoria paused. His reservation? Jordan continued, his voice still even indicates what exactly. Because my boarding pass says 1A. Issued 3 weeks ago. Transaction cleared. So, unless you're about to tell me there was a double booking, I'm not sure what we're doing here. Owen Gallagher stood up from his seat. I'd like to hear the answer to that as well, he said. Because from where I'm sitting, I see a young man with a valid boarding pass being asked to move so a different passenger can take his seat. And I'm trying to understand the policy basis for that. Preston turned on him. Nobody asked you, friend, Preston said. No, Owen said pleasantly. But I'm asking. There's a difference. Mia Torres had not moved. Her coffee sat untouched. Her phone was recording at a 60-degree angle that captured the entire width of the aisle. Jordan's stillness, Victoria's posture, Preston's color, Owen's expression. She had not said a word. She was 19 years old, and she understood with the particular instincts of her generation that sometimes the most important thing you can do in a room is witness it accurately. Jordan closed his book. He placed it flat on his thigh with both hands. He looked at Victoria. Is there a supervisor on this flight? He said. Victoria's smile thinned. I am the senior cabin crew for this flight, sir. Then I'd like to speak with the captain, Jordan said. Victoria said nothing for a moment. Then she turned and walked toward the cockpit. The cockpit door opened with a mechanical click, and Captain Dale Merritt stepped out with the heavy authority of a man who ran this particular piece of sky and expected the ground to stay the way he'd left it. He was 56 years old, broad-shouldered, with the kind of military posture that had settled into something slightly softer over decades of office chairs and airline food. His silver mustache was trimmed and serious. His uniform was immaculate in the way of someone who still cared about the uniform after all these years. He had been flying for 28 years. He had never had a problem he couldn't solve in under 3 minutes. He stepped into the first-class cabin and took a single look at the configuration of people in the aisle. His eyes moved Victoria tense, Preston red-faced, Owen standing, Mia still, and in seat 1A, a young man in a gray hoodie who was watching Merritt approach with an expression of complete, unreadable calm. Merritt's assessment was faster than Victoria's. He was a captain. He needed faster decisions. He saw what he saw. He decided what he decided. What's the situation, he said to Victoria, though he was looking at Jordan. Manifest discrepancy, Sir Victoria said. Seat 1A. Mr. Albright's reservation was not correctly processed in the system, and this passenger is declining to accept a relocation. I've paid for this seat, Jordan said. There's a boarding pass right there with my name on it. Merritt looked at the boarding pass. He looked at Jordan. He stepped forward until he was standing directly in front of the seat. Son, Merritt said, and the word son had a weight to it that was not fatherly. I've got 212 passengers on this aircraft, and we are already 9 minutes behind schedule. Victoria has offered you a perfectly acceptable alternative seat. Now, I don't know what happened in the booking system, and frankly, I don't have the time to find out right now. What I do have the authority to do, and I want to be very clear about this, is designate you a non-compliant passenger if you continue to refuse a reasonable crew request. You understand what that means? It means security, Jordan said. It means security. Merritt confirmed, and the no-fly list and a lot of paperwork that's going to make your day a great deal worse than it needs to be. So I'm going to ask you one time, plainly, will you please move to the seat Victoria has indicated? Jordan looked up at Merritt. His expression hadn't changed. Captain, he said, I haven't raised my voice. I haven't stood up. I haven't made physical contact with anyone. I haven't said anything that a reasonable person would characterize as threatening or disruptive. What I've done is sit in the seat whose number matches the boarding pass I purchased legally and in full. Can you tell me specifically on what safety or regulatory basis you are removing me? Merritt's jaw tightened. He was not accustomed to being asked this type of question by someone in a hoodie. The basis is crew authority, Merritt said. On my aircraft, I am the final word on passenger management. And right now, my word is you move, or we call security. Jordan held Merritt's gaze for a moment. Owen Gallagher said quietly from 3A, "This isn't right, Captain. I want to note for the record that I'm a witness to this interaction and the young man has done nothing to justify removal." Preston made a dismissive sound. "Nobody cares what you note." "Then note it yourself," Owen said. "Somebody will." Merritt pointed toward the jetway door. "Sir, I need you to gather your belongings." Jordan felt it then, the heat that lived in his chest on days like this. He had been warned about it since he was old enough to understand what it meant. His father had described it as a burning. His grandfather had given it a different name recognition. The moment your body understands what's happening before your mind has finished translating it, the moment you realize the room has decided something about you that has nothing to do with anything you did. He let the heat be there. He did not let it move his face. He thought of his grandfather's hands on his face. He thought of the voice, "You carry nothing of theirs." "Okay," Jordan said. The word came out quiet and flat and final. He stood up, all 6 feet 2 inches of him. Merritt stepped back slightly, an involuntary adjustment. Preston, who had been leaning forward, straightened. Jordan took his book. He placed it in his backpack. He zipped the backpack with unhurried care, the way you pack something you intend to use again soon. He slung it over one shoulder. He looked at Merritt. "You're making a mistake," Jordan said. "Not a threat. A statement of fact. The way a navigator might note that a heading is wrong." Merritt said nothing. He gestured toward the door. Jordan walked. He walked the length of first class first. 6 rows, 12 seats, maybe 15 seconds in real time. It felt longer. He felt every eye. Not all of them were unkind. Some of the faces he passed were simply frozen in that particular human stillness that comes when you are watching something unfair happen and have decided not to get involved. But some of the faces were something else. Some of them confirmed what had just been decided about him quietly, privately, in the way people confirm things they already believed. Someone in 3C said something to the person beside them. Low, barely audible, but not inaudible. Did he actually have a ticket? Someone in 5A said in the hushed tone of a whisper that wanted to be heard. "Kids today. No respect for the rules." A man in 6B pulled his carry-on bag a few inches closer as Jordan passed a gesture so small that the man probably didn't notice he had made it. Jordan noticed. He filed it. He kept walking. He passed the curtain into business class and the register changed. Fewer people looking. More people pointedly not looking, which was its own kind of looking. He kept his chin level. His shoulders were back. His pace was steady. He looked at the exit door the way a navigator looks at a fixed star. Not because it was his destination, but because it gave him something true to orient by. He passed seat 2C on the way out. For one fraction of a second, his eyes and Mia Torres's eyes met. She was still recording. She hadn't tried to hide it anymore. She held the phone openly now, aimed at him. In her expression was something Jordan did not often see in the faces of strangers. Not pity. Something older and harder than pity. Recognition. The kind that passes between two people who understand without words that they are both participants in the same story, even if they've been given different lines. Jordan gave no reaction. But he saw it. He kept walking. Economy, 200 seats. The sounds of breakfast wrappers and children settling and earbuds going in. Less aware of what had happened. But the energy moved through here too, the particular ripple of something wrong passing through a contained space. A few heads turned. A woman in an aisle seat caught Jordan's eye and looked immediately away. He reached the forward door. The flight attendant stationed there, Diego Reyes, 29 years old, his first year flying the transatlantic route, stepped slightly aside to let Jordan pass. Their eyes met briefly. Diego's expression was the expression of a person who knows something is wrong and has not yet found the part of himself that will say so out loud. Not yet. Jordan stepped through the door onto the jetway. The cool, damp air of the terminal hit him immediately. After the pressurized warmth of the cabin, it felt like something honest. 2 airport security officers were waiting. Officer Carmen Rivera, 30 years old, practical-faced, experienced. Officer Tom Walsh, 45, the kind of long-service calm that comes from having seen most things. They stood with the body language of people expecting a confrontation. Him, Walsh said to Victoria, who had followed Jordan to the door. "That's him," Victoria said. "Please make sure he doesn't attempt to reboard." She turned and went back onto the plane, the heavy door sealed behind her. Jordan stood in the middle of the jetway. He looked at the 2 officers. "I'm not reboarding," he said. "I'm leaving." He took 3 steps toward the gate area and then stopped. He set his backpack on the floor. He opened the front pocket and took out his phone. Rivera watched him with the careful attention of her training. Walsh shifted his weight. Jordan looked at the phone for a moment. He did not scroll through contacts. He had the number in his memory the way you have certain numbers. His grandfather's emergency line, the one Raymond Adeyemi had given him when Jordan was 17 and told him this is not for small things. But if something is genuinely wrong, you call it. I will always pick up. Jordan pressed call. It rang once. Yes. The voice on the other end was low and textured, the kind of voice that carries weight simply by existing. Old enough to carry it. Calm enough to know where to put it. Grandfather Jordan said. Rivera, who had been watching Jordan with professional neutrality, registered the word grandfather without processing its significance yet. Walsh was looking at his radio. Jordan said the voice. "You should be in the air." "Why do I hear terminal noise?" "I was removed from the flight," Jordan said. His voice was steady, completely steady. "Lead purser and the captain ordered me off. A passenger named Preston Albright wanted my seat. They said I was a manifest discrepancy. They threatened the no-fly list." A silence. It was not the silence of confusion. It was not the silence of a man who needed time to process what he was hearing. It was the silence of a man who was already moving 3 steps ahead, calculating weight and leverage and outcome, and had paused only briefly to confirm that the information was complete. "Are you hurt?" "No. Just walked off my own flight in front of the whole cabin." "Is the plane still at the gate?" "Yes. They just closed the door." The voice said, "Jordan, do not leave that gate. Give me 90 seconds. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to remind them," Raymond Adeyemi said quietly, "what it costs to build something and how fast a foundation dissolves when you pull the right support." Back inside the cabin, before the door had sealed completely behind Jordan, Owen Gallagher stood up from seat 3A. He was not the type. He knew that about himself. 38-years-old management consulting lived in a world of careful language and measured responses in situations that could be navigated with the right combination of data and tact. He had spent most of the last 10 minutes telling himself that this wasn't his business, that he didn't know the full story, that maybe there really was a legitimate manifest issue that he wasn't seeing. But he had watched Jordan walk out of that cabin. He had watched the boarding pass sitting on the armrest, still there, unclaimed, clearly printed unambiguous, and he had watched Victoria not once pick it up and actually compare it properly against the manifest on her screen. He stood up. He walked to the front of first class where Victoria was now resettling the service preparation, as if the previous 10 minutes had been a brief weather event rather than the removal of a paying customer from his legally purchased seat. "I'd like to formally note something," Owen said. Victoria turned with her smile in place. "Of course, sir." "I watched that entire interaction," Owen said. That young man had a valid boarding pass. I saw it clearly. You examined that manifest for less than 5 seconds before telling him his name wasn't appearing. You did not re-enter his name. You did not call ground operations to verify. You made a determination, and then a different passenger with no manifest claim to that seat was allowed to board in his place. I would like to know the policy that justifies that sequence of events. Victoria's smile did not waver, but something behind it did. A tiny recalibration. Mr. Albright's account was. Mr. Albright's account entitles him to priority boarding and lounge access. Owen said, his voice still reasonable, not accusatory. The tone of a man who has worked in enough boardrooms to know that precision is more effective than volume. It does not entitle him to a seat that someone else purchased. Does it? Preston looked up from 1A, where he had now installed himself with the air of a man who had won. Are you going to let him interrogate you? Preston said to Victoria. I'm asking a question, not conducting an interrogation, Owen said. There's a difference. Mia Torres had stopped recording her TikTok ambient content. She was now filming directly, deliberately, her iced coffee abandoned on the tray table. She was not hiding it anymore. The phone was held steadily in both hands, aimed with the practiced intentionality of a generation that understood documentation is not aggression. It is record-keeping. From the galley, Diego Reyes watched. He had been watching since the beginning. He had stood with his clipboard and said nothing while Victoria approached Jordan the first time. Nothing when Preston arrived, nothing when Merritt stepped out and pointed at the door. He had told himself each time that it was not his call, that Victoria had seniority, that this was above his grade. But he had watched Jordan Adeyemi stand up from that seat with his chin level and his shoulders back and walk the full length of the cabin without looking down once, and something had happened in Diego's chest that he didn't quite have language for yet. Something that felt like the first second after you realize you've been sitting in a room with a gas leak the moment clarity arrives with a slight smell of something wrong. He looked at the boarding pass still sitting on the armrest of seat 1A beneath Preston Albright's elbow. He looked at Victoria. He looked at Owen. He kept his clipboard. He didn't speak yet, but he was no longer just watching. Before we go further, I need to stop here for a moment. Because what you just watched happen to Jordan Adeyemi on that jetway isn't just a story about one flight. It's a story about something most of us have felt at least once. That moment when you're exactly where you're supposed to be, where you've earned the right to be, and someone looks at you and decides you don't fit the picture they had in mind. And instead of checking their picture, they try to move you. If you've ever been there, if you've ever walked out of a room that was yours, carrying something you had every right to keep, because someone else decided the space looked better without you in it, drop your city or your country in the comments right now. I want to know where you're watching from, and if you believe that dignity shouldn't require a title or a suit or a certain kind of face to be respected, hit subscribe and share this video, because what happens next at Gate 31 is the reason this story has been watched by 47 million people. Jordan is about to make a phone call, and $1.7 billion is about to stop moving. Jordan stood at Gate 31 with his backpack on one shoulder and his phone in his hand, and he looked at the plane. Through the curved glass wall of the gate area, he could see Flight 447 sitting at the end of the jetway. Still, engines not yet spooled. Ground crew moving around the fuselage in their neon vests, completing the pre-departure checks they'd been running since before any passenger boarded. A fuel truck was parked alongside the left wing, connected and pumping. The plane looked exactly as it always looked from the outside. Contained. Purposeful. Ready to carry 212 people across the Atlantic without incident. Jordan looked at it for a moment. Then he pressed call. It rang once. Yes, grandfather. Jordan kept his voice low and factual. I was removed from the flight. Lead purser named Victoria Hale told me there was a manifest discrepancy with my seat. Then a passenger named Preston Albright, he said he's a Diamond status member, spends $4 million a year with the airline, demanded seat 1A. Captain Dale Merritt came out and told me I was a non-compliant passenger and gave me the choice of moving to row 5 or being flagged as a security threat. I left the aircraft. The door is sealed. They haven't pushed back yet. The silence on the other end lasted exactly 4 seconds. Are you injured in any way? No. Was there a witness? Several. One passenger stood up and questioned the crew directly. A young woman was recording from the beginning. The voice did not change temperature. It never did. Raymond Adeyemi had a way of receiving information, even information like this, with the absolute steadiness of someone who had learned long ago that the most effective response to almost any crisis was to slow down and think faster than the crisis. Naomi is on standby, Raymond said. I'm going to authorize Clause 9. Do you understand what that means? Jordan did. He had read the Beacon Capital operating agreements as part of his preparation for the London meeting. Clause 9 was the ethical conduct provision, the part of the contract that said in language careful enough to have been written by lawyers who anticipated exactly this kind of situation, that any significant act of discrimination against a principal party of Adeyemi Holdings during the term of the agreement would constitute grounds for immediate suspension of all financial commitments. How wide does the suspension go? Jordan asked. Complete, Raymond said. Fuel authorization, engine lease agreements, credit facility, everything that has our name underneath it. Jordan was quiet for a moment. Through the glass, the fuel truck was completing its connection to the wing. How many people work for Meridian? Jordan said. Approximately 9,000, Raymond said. About 4,000 of whom are ground staff and cabin crew, the ones who had nothing to do with this morning. Jordan watched the tarmac. A man in a neon vest was laughing at something his colleague had said, the laugh visible from behind the glass shoulders shaking. 2 baggage handlers were loading a cart, working in the efficient rhythm of people who had done this task enough times that they no longer thought about it consciously. Do it, Jordan said. But I want to be the one who decides how long it lasts. Raymond was quiet for a moment. Then good. Naomi's number appeared on Jordan's screen almost immediately, a 3-way connection Raymond had added while they spoke. Jordan. Naomi Park's voice was brisk, focused, the voice of someone already at her workstation with her hands on multiple keyboards. I have Clause 9 queued. Authorization awaits your grandfather's confirmation. Should I proceed? Proceed, Raymond said. Stand by, Naomi said. 90 seconds. Jordan looked back at the jetway door. It was sealed. Somewhere behind that door, in seat 1, a Preston Albright was stretching out his legs and probably reaching for his Financial Times. Officer Rivera stepped slightly closer. She had been watching Jordan's side of the call with the careful attention of someone recalibrating. Is everything okay? She said. It depends on what you mean by okay, Jordan said. His phone buzzed. A text from Naomi, Clause 9 active. Beacon Capital has issued formal notification to Meridian Airways. Fuel authorization suspended. Engine lease agreement suspended effective immediately. Credit facility frozen. Merger transaction status terminated pending review. Jordan read it once. He put the phone back in his pocket. He looked at Flight 447 through the glass. He counted to 7. Then the fuel truck disconnected from the wing. Not gradually. Not as part of a normal pre-departure sequence. The truck reversed quickly as if it had been called away from something urgent. The tow bar connecting the truck to the aircraft was dropped. The ground crew member handling it paused, looked at his radio, looked at the plane, and then jogged away from it with the speed of someone who had just received information they didn't want to be standing near. Officer Walsh was looking at his radio. He frowned. Rivera's radio crackled. She listened. Her expression did not change on the surface, but something shifted underneath it. the particular micro-adjustment of someone receiving information that reframes a situation they thought they had already understood. She looked at Jordan. She said, "Mr. Adeyemi, is there something I should know about this situation?" Jordan looked at her. "Probably a few things," he said. The house in Westport, Connecticut stood on 3 acres of mature oak and maple, the kind of land that didn't announce itself but made its presence felt. The driveway was gravel. The house was white clapboard and dark shutters, 200 years of careful maintenance. There was nothing about the exterior that told you what was inside, and Raymond Adeyemi had always thought that was the point. He was seated at the kitchen table with his morning tea and the Financial Times when Naomi had called. The tea was Earl Grey, strong, no sugar. The paper was open to the markets section. He had not yet finished reading it. He put it down the moment his phone rang. He put his cup down a moment later. He sat for 1 second after the call ended, very still the way a body is still when a mind is moving very fast. Then he stood up, walked to the study adjacent to the kitchen, sat down at his desk, and opened his laptop. Raymond Adeyemi was 74 years old. He had been born in Lagos, Nigeria, the 3rd son of a man who owned 2 fishing boats and believed with an almost irrational conviction that his children would own larger things. He had come to the United States at 19 with $200 and an acceptance letter to a university in Ohio that had taken a chance on his examination scores. He had spent the next 55 years being underestimated by people who confused quietness with smallness. He had built Adeyemi Holdings into a $40 billion enterprise, not because he had been louder or faster or more aggressive than the people around him, but because he had understood early and completely where real power lived. Not in the face of things, in the foundation. He had told Jordan this since the boy was old enough to listen. Understand where the weight rests. Everything else is decoration. He confirmed Clause 9 with 2 keystrokes. Then he called Naomi. "Full suspension," he said. "Fuel, engines, credit facility." "All of it. Already executing," Naomi said. "And call Frank Doyle." "Not a message. A call. I want him on the line before the plane moves." "Naomi. I'll get him now. He's in a board meeting celebrating the merger announcement." Raymond paused. Then he said, "That seems appropriate timing." He ended the call. He stood at his desk for a moment, looking out the study window at the oaks in the yard. The leaves were November brown now, most of them down, and the branches were bare against the gray sky. He had done business with Meridian Airways for 11 years. He had extended the credit facility that allowed them to expand their transatlantic fleet. He had approved the engine lease agreements that currently kept 4 of their Dreamliners in the air. He had underwritten the merger $1.7 billion of structured financing that was, as of this morning, the centerpiece of Meridian's survival plan. He had done all of this because the numbers made sense, and because Frank Doyle had over 11 years presented himself as a man who ran a clean operation. Raymond had a personal rule: I give trust once. I extend it on evidence. I withdraw it on evidence. He had evidence now. He opened his email and composed one message. It was addressed to the Beacon Capital legal team. The subject line was 3 words, Clause 9. Meridian. Today. The body of the message contained 8 sentences. Each one was precise, measured, and devastating in the way that language is devastating when it is written by a man who understands exactly what each word will cost. He sent it. Then he picked up his tea, which was cool now, and drank it anyway. Outside, the oak branches moved in the November wind. Raymond sat back in his chair and waited for his phone to ring. He estimated it would take approximately 4 minutes. He was accustomed to being right about things like this. It took 3 minutes and 40 seconds. The screen said, Frank Doyle. Raymond let it ring twice. Then he answered. Frank, he said. On the other end, Doyle's voice had a quality Raymond recognized immediately, the voice of a man who has just walked into a room and discovered something catastrophically wrong, but has not yet finished deciding how to respond to it. Raymond. What in the world is happening with our accounts? My CFO is telling me your crew on Flight 447 removed my grandson from a seat he purchased because a different passenger wanted it and because your flight attendant looked at Jordan and decided he wasn't the kind of person who belonged in first class. There was silence. Raymond. Jordan is my heir, Raymond said. His voice was not angry. Anger would have been easier for Doyle to manage. Raymond's voice was the voice of a man stating a series of facts. He was traveling to London to sign the final trust documents that represent the legal foundation of our business relationship. Your captain and your purser escorted him off the aircraft in front of 200 passengers and told him he was a security threat. Another silence. The assets stay frozen, Raymond said, until Jordan decides otherwise. Not until you apologize. Not until you fire someone. Until my grandson decides. Is that clear? Frank Doyle said yes. Raymond ended the call. Preston Albright had settled. That was the word for it. Settled the way certain men settle into a space that they have decided, regardless of circumstances, is theirs. He had arranged his Financial Times on the tray table. He had angled the seatback screen to the position he preferred. He had caught Victoria's eye and raised 2 fingers, the shorthand for a drink order she had learned to recognize in the first 30 seconds of his boarding. Victoria was pulling out a crystal glass from the galley cabinet when the lights went out. Not gradually. Not the gentle dimming of a crew-initiated rest mode. Every light in first class died simultaneously. The ambient overhead panels, the reading spots, the accent, lighting in the galley. The flight deck's soft glow visible through the slightly open cockpit door went dark. The hum of the air conditioning, which had been such a constant presence that passengers had stopped noticing it, ceased. The silence that replaced it was the particular silence of a sealed space that had just lost all the sounds of its own functioning. It lasted 2 seconds. Then the emergency floor track lighting activated low amber running along the base of the seats, and that was all. Preston looked up from the Financial Times. Victoria. His voice had the edge of a man whose inconvenience threshold had just been reached. What's happening? Victoria was gripping the counter. The crystal glass was still in her hand. She was staring at the intercom panel on the galley wall, which had also gone dark. Small technical issue, she said. Her voice had lost something it had carried all morning. Some load-bearing structure beneath the professional surface was showing signs of stress. Small technical issues don't kill the APU, said a man in 4B who appeared to know something about aircraft systems. In the cockpit, Captain Merritt was looking at his instrument panel with the expression of a man who is waiting to wake up from a dream. The entire panel was dead. Every LED, every screen, every indicator that had been glowing amber and green when he sat down was dark. His co-pilot, First Officer Steve Park, had his hands held up from the controls in the universal gesture of someone who needs to communicate. I didn't touch anything. What did you do? Merritt said. Nothing, Park said. I have been sitting here with my hands in my lap. The radio came on. Not the tower frequency, not ground control. Operations, Meridian 447. This is Ops. Captain, do not push back. Repeat, do not push back. We have received a Clause 9 activation notice from Beacon Capital. All fuel authorization for Flight 447 has been suspended. Engine lease agreements for your aircraft are in active review. You are currently on the ground with leased engines that we may no longer have the legal right to operate. Merritt picked up the handset. Operations say again. What is Clause 9? The operations coordinator's voice had the controlled urgency of someone who needed to communicate panic without technically panicking. It is a contract provision, Captain. Beacon Capital has frozen the credit facility, the fuel authorization, and the engine lease agreements simultaneously. All of it. The entire financial structure supporting this airline's current fleet operation. Merritt looked at Park. "Who is Beacon Capital Park?" said carefully. "A holding company," Merritt said slowly. "They're one of our primary lenders. His voice stopped. His eyes went to the manifest on the clipboard beside his seat. The one he had glanced at earlier. The one with the name printed in standard thermal font. Adeyemi Lincoln. No. Not Lincoln. Jordan. Jordan Adeyemi. He looked at it for what felt like a very long time. He had flown the transatlantic route for 12 years. He read the business news. He knew the names that moved money in the aviation sector. He had simply never, in 12 years of reading business news, connected the name Adeyemi on a manifest with the Adeyemi he knew from the financial pages. Park said, "Captain, is the Adeyemi family connected to Beacon Capital?" Merritt set the manifest down. "They own it," he said. The silence in the cockpit was different from the silence in the cabin. In the cabin, the silence was confusion. In the cockpit, the silence was the sound of a man's career ending. Back in first class, Preston Albright had tried his phone twice. His corporate account was locked. He tried his personal banking app. A red banner appeared. "Account under review. Please contact your branch." He stared at it. The woman in 2B who had been posting about her champagne 40 minutes ago was now on her phone reading a text from her husband. She looked up from the screen and looked at Preston with an expression that was not quite sympathy. "Preston," she said. She had a low, precise voice that made the single word sound like the click of a lock. "My husband is on the Orion Logistics Board. He just texted me. They're in emergency session." Preston looked at her. About what he said, though something in his chest already knew. She turned the phone so he could see her husband's text. "Albright incident on Meridian flight. Adeyemi family involved board. Calling emergency, vote advice. Preston to retain counsel immediately." Preston read it twice. His hand, the one holding the phone, was not quite steady. Outside the window, he watched the fuel truck drive away from the wing. He watched it park. Not in a holding position, not idling nearby. It drove fully away back toward the service road as if Flight 447 were no longer on its schedule. Preston Albright set his Financial Times down very carefully on the tray table. He did not pick it up again. In the Adeyemi Holdings operations office on the 32nd floor of a building in Midtown Manhattan, Naomi Park sat in front of 3 monitors and executed the most consequential 90 seconds of her professional career with the focused calm of someone who had prepared for exactly this. She was 33 years old. She had worked for Raymond Adeyemi for 6 years, having been hired directly out of a finance program where she had graduated first in her class. Raymond had interviewed her himself, which was unusual. At the end of the interview, he had asked her one question that wasn't on the standard list. If you were instructed to do something you believed was right, but that would make a very powerful person very uncomfortable, what would you need in order to proceed? She had said, the authority and the evidence. He had said, "Good. You'll have both when the time comes." She had understood that day that the time would come. This morning, it had come. The Clause 9 activation required her to execute a sequence of financial instructions across 4 separate platforms simultaneously. The fuel authorization suspension was processed through Meridian's operational accounts, where Beacon Capital held controlling signatory rights. The engine lease suspension was filed through the Beacon Capital asset management system, flagging the 4 Dreamliner engines currently under Meridian lease as pending review, which, under the terms of the agreement, triggered an automatic operational hold. The credit facility freeze was handled through Beacon's primary banking partnership, where a single administrative designation, Clause 9 ethical conduct breach, was sufficient to pause all disbursements and lock the existing line. The merger transaction was last. Naomi looked at the screen for a moment before she touched that one. $1.7 billion. 2 years of negotiation. A deal that had been the cornerstone of Meridian's survival plan, and in a different dimension of the same story, the reason Jordan had been on that plane this morning traveling to London to sign the trust documentation that would have made him a named principal in the financing structure. He was flying to sign papers that would have helped the airline that just kicked him off a plane. Naomi pressed the key. Merger transaction status terminated pending review. She sent the text to Jordan. Then she called him. Jordan. He answered on the first ring. His voice was the same as it always was, clear, measured, unrushed. She had always found that remarkable about him. Even now. Everything is active, she said. The notification has been sent to Meridian Ops. They know what's happening. Frank Doyle's office has been contacted. Your grandfather is on the line with him now. How long does this last, Jordan said. Until you say otherwise, Naomi said. Raymond's instruction was specific. You hold the timeline. There was a pause. Naomi Jordan said, How many people work for Meridian who had nothing to do with this morning? She knew he would ask this. She had prepared the answer. Ground crew, cabin staff, gate agents, maintenance. Roughly 4,000 people on the operational side who are completely removed from what happened. Jordan was quiet. Naomi could hear the ambient sounds of the terminal behind him. Distant announcements, the rumble of carts, the muted background noise of a sizable airport going about its Tuesday. Then he said, I'm not going to let them burn. I just need the right things to happen first. Naomi understood. What do you need? Jordan told her. She wrote it down. 3 items, straightforward, specific, proportionate. The kind of list that told you something about the person who wrote it, someone who wanted accountability, not destruction. She sent the list to Raymond. His response came back in under 60 seconds. 1 word, agreed. Naomi looked at the 3 monitors, the frozen accounts, the suspended authorizations. $1.7 billion sitting in the financial equivalent of a held breath, waiting for a 24-year-old man at Gate 31 to decide what it would take to let things breathe again. She thought about the question Raymond had asked her in the interview 6 years ago. She thought about her answer. She had both things now, the authority and the evidence. She straightened in her chair. She placed both hands on the desk. She waited for Jordan's next call. Outside the 32nd floor windows, the November sky over Manhattan was the same pewter gray it had been all morning. Below, the city moved with its usual indifferent speed. Up here in this room, the air had a particular quality that Naomi had learned to recognize over 6 years of working for Raymond Adeyemi. The quality of a decision that cannot be taken back. The quality of a reckoning. The 44th floor conference room of Meridian Airways Manhattan headquarters had been decorated for a celebration that had not yet been officially designated as a celebration, in the careful corporate way of people who want to celebrate before something is final, but don't want to be seen doing so. There was a table arrangement. There was sparkling water in crystal pitchers. There were 16 board members and senior executives in their best Tuesday suits. At the head of the table stood Frank Doyle, 61 years old, silver-haired. The kind of handsome that had probably been more powerful 20 years ago but still did real work. He was holding a glass of sparkling water, and he was in the middle of a sentence that began, "To the future of Meridian Airways," and to the partnership that is going to his assistant, Sarah Morton, opened the door. The door was supposed to be closed until the formal remarks were complete. Everyone in the room knew that. Sarah Morton knew that above all. She had been Frank Doyle's executive assistant for 9 years. She had attended more of these events than she could count. She had never once opened that door during formal remarks. She opened it now. She walked to Frank Doyle's side with the careful, controlled speed of someone who had learned how to move urgently without appearing to run. She leaned close to his ear. Doyle's face did something. The sentence he was in the middle of did not complete itself. He looked at Sarah. She slid a tablet in front of him. The screen showed the Meridian financial dashboard. Every figure that should have been black was red. Every line that should have been flowing was stopped. Doyle set down his glass. He picked up the tablet. He read what was on it. The room was very quiet. Board members exchanged glances. Someone cleared their throat. Frank said the CFO from his seat at the left side of the table. "Our liquidity monitor is showing a complete hold on the Beacon credit line. Is there—" The phone on the credenza at the side of the room rang. Landline. The board line. The one that very few people had the number to. Sarah answered it. She listened for 3 seconds. She turned to Doyle. Her face told him everything before she spoke. "It's Raymond Adeyemi," she said. "Line 1. The room went completely silent. Frank Doyle knew in a way that was physical rather than intellectual what it meant that Raymond Adeyemi was personally calling this line at this exact moment. Raymond didn't make social calls. He didn't check in. In 11 years of business together, Raymond had called this number 4 times. Each time the call had had consequences that lasted months. Doyle picked up the receiver. He pressed speaker. He looked at the room. Raymond Doyle said. His voice was controlled and pleasant and showed no sign of the sweat that had appeared at his hairline in the last 60 seconds. "There seems to be some kind of technical issue with our accounts. I'm sure we can—" "There is no technical issue," Lawrence Raymond said. His voice filled the conference room the way a large, quiet object fills a space not by being loud, but by having mass. "I terminated the agreement under Clause 9. 40 minutes ago, your lead purser and your captain removed my grandson from a seat he purchased legally and in full. They did so because a different passenger wanted the seat, and because Victoria Hale looked at Jordan and concluded that he didn't look like someone who belonged in first class." Doyle's hand was on the table. He put it flat. "Raymond, I was not aware Jordan is my legal heir and the designated signatory on the London Trust closing that was scheduled for this afternoon," Raymond said. "The meeting that the entirety of our financial arrangement was structured around. He was on that plane for that reason, and he was treated." Raymond paused for the duration of one breath like a problem that needed to be removed so a more convenient passenger could be comfortable. A board member at the far end of the table pressed his hand flat on the table. A mirror of Doyle's gesture, the unconscious movement of people trying to hold something steady. The Meridian stock ticker running in a small window on the side monitor that Sarah Morton always kept open during board events had dropped 7% in the last 4 minutes. Someone's algorithm had caught the freeze. "Frank, I need to understand what you need to make this right," Doyle said. His voice had changed. The pleasantness was gone. What remained was the voice of a man who understood exactly how much was at stake and had abandoned every protective register in favor of something more direct. "It is not what I need," Raymond said. "My grandson holds the timeline. When he is satisfied that the right things have happened, he will call. Until then, the assets remain where they are," Raymond Doyle said. "People will be hurt by this who had nothing to do." "I know that," Raymond said. "Jordan knows that, which is why I expect the right things to happen very quickly. I suggest you start with finding Dale Merritt and Victoria Hale." The line went dead. Frank Doyle looked at the conference room. 16 faces looked back. The sparkling water sat in its crystal pitchers. The celebration that had been carefully not quite begun would now not be happening for quite some time. Doyle turned to Sarah. "Get me Merritt on the emergency cockpit line," he said. "And someone pull the manifest for Flight 447. I want the name Adeyemi Jordan. I want to know everything about who he is and why I am only learning this now." Sarah was already moving. The stock ticker dropped another 3 points. without air conditioning first class on a grounded Dreamliner in November was still warmer than it should have been. The aircraft was a sealed environment, and sealed environments, when their circulation systems failed, reminded occupants in short order that what felt like luxury was always at some level just managed atmosphere. Preston Albright was aware of this in his collar, which had grown uncomfortable in the last 10 minutes, and in his temples, which had developed the particular low-frequency pressure that preceded his most difficult headaches. He had tried his corporate card access 3 times. Each time, account suspended per request of Beacon Capital. He had tried his personal banking app. Locked. He had tried to call his CFO. The call had gone to voicemail, which his CFO never let happen during business hours. He had received the text from the board member's wife in 2B, the one about the emergency vote at Orion Logistics, the one that said retain counsel immediately. He was currently sitting with these facts arranged in front of him like pieces of a puzzle whose picture he could see clearly, but was refusing to acknowledge. Victoria Hale stood in the galley doorway looking at the emergency floor lighting with an expression she was working hard to keep professional. She had received 2 messages in the last 6 minutes from ground operations, first a notification that Beacon Capital had issued a Clause 9 alert second, a terse instruction to remain on board pending further communication from Meridian headquarters. She had read both messages and was now occupying the very specific mental space of a person who understands that something catastrophic has happened, but has not yet received official confirmation of what precisely her role in it was. She knew. Of course, she knew. But knowing and having it confirmed in writing were different categories. Owen Gallagher, still in seat 3A, had opened his phone and was reading the alert that had just pushed to his Bloomberg app, Meridian Airways stock falls 12%. Unconfirmed reports of credit facility suspension by primary lender Beacon Capital. He looked at the seat number above his row. He looked at where Jordan Adeyemi had been sitting 40 minutes ago. He said to no one in particular, and to everyone, "The boy in the hoodie." "What is his name?" Nobody answered. Then Mia Torres from 2C said quietly, "Jordan Adeyemi." Silence. "I looked him up when he walked down the aisle," Mia said. She had been trying to find context for the story she was filming and had done a straightforward search. When the Adeyemi name had come up, she had gone very still and very careful, the way you go still when you realize the ground has shifted under you. I didn't want to say it out loud until I knew more. "His grandfather is Raymond Adeyemi, Adeyemi Holdings. They own Beacon Capital." The woman in 2B had stopped reading texts. She had gone pale. Preston Albright felt the temperature of his own face. It was high. Victoria came out of the galley. Her professional posture was still assembled, but the assembly was showing stress fractures. Preston looked at her. "You knew he had a valid boarding pass," he said. His voice was very low. "I attempted to verify. You looked at it for 5 seconds and told him there was a manifest issue," Preston said. "And then I walked on, and you let me take his seat." The statement of it was flat and clear, and already in his voice was the particular tone of a man beginning the process of constructing distance between himself and the events of the last hour. Victoria said nothing. Preston's phone lit up. His assistant. He answered. "Mr. Albright." Her voice was careful and tight. The board vote concluded. "Effective immediately. Orion Logistics is placing your account under administrative review and suspending your executive authorization pending investigation into an incident described as conduct unbecoming a senior representative of the company. HR will be in contact." Preston stared at a point somewhere above the seat in front of him. The headache had arrived in full. "Sir," his assistant said. "Call legal," Preston said. "Tell them I'll explain when I land. If I land." He ended the call. The cabin had acquired the specific silence of a space full of people who are all processing the same information at different speeds and arriving at the same conclusion. Phones were out. People were reading. Someone in 5C had the CNN app open and was holding it up to show their seatmate. The chyron running across the bottom of the screen said, Meridian Airways Credit Freeze Racial Profiling Allegations. Investigation underway. Owen Gallagher closed his laptop for the second time. He looked at Diego Reyes, who was standing near the galley door. Diego said Owen and the word had a weight because Owen had asked Victoria for his name earlier during the confrontation, the same way you get the names of everyone in a room when something important is happening. Diego. When all this is sorted, the captain is going to need a full account of what crew members witnessed from the beginning, including what you saw from the galley. Diego looked at the galley floor. Then he looked up. I saw everything, he said quietly. Victoria turned toward him sharply. Diego looked at her. Not with hostility. With something simpler and more final. I saw it from the start, he said. I didn't say anything when I should have. I'm saying it now. The cabin was very quiet. From outside, through the windows on the left side of the aircraft, passengers could see two men in dark suits walking purposefully across the tarmac toward the plane. They were followed by a woman with a clipboard and the particular speed of someone who had been given a directive 5 minutes ago. Preston Albright watched them come. He folded his Financial Times. Very precisely, the way you fold something you don't intend to read again today. In the forward galley, Victoria Hale looked at her reflection in the dark screen of the intercom panel. The professional mask was still technically in place. But behind it, in the eyes that looked back at her, was a woman who had made a decision at 6:58 in the morning that she could not unmake. The tarmac men had reached the jetway door. They were about to start knocking. Officer Carmen Rivera had been with airport security for 7 years. She had a methodical mind and a fast read of situations, and she was currently standing at Gate 31 with both of those tools operating at full capacity. She had begun the morning with a simple assignment. Non-compliant passenger in first class reported as potentially uncooperative needed to be managed off the aircraft. Standard. She had done 20 variations of this assignment. The assignment had stopped being standard approximately 8 minutes ago when the fuel truck had reversed away from the wing of Flight 447, and her radio had delivered 3 separate notifications in under 4 minutes. Clause 9, Activation Credit Facility, Suspension Operations Hold. None of those words appeared in her standard assignment parameters. She stood near Jordan, who was leaning against the wall of the gate area with his backpack on the floor beside him, reading the book he had been reading when she first saw him. He was reading On a Jetway, after being removed from a transatlantic flight. After a $1.7 billion financial freeze had been triggered by a phone call he had made from this exact spot. Reading. Officer Walsh came up beside Rivera and lowered his voice. I ran the name, Walsh said. His voice had the quality of a man reporting something he hadn't been expecting to need to report. Jordan Adeyemi. He's Raymond Adeyemi's grandson. Raymond Adeyemi is the founder and principal of Adeyemi Holdings. Beacon Capital is a Adeyemi Holdings subsidiary. They have active financial agreements with Meridian worth more than $1.7 billion, Rivera said. Walsh looked at her. The estimate I'm seeing is closer to 2.4, counting the lease agreements, he said. Rivera looked at Jordan. The profile she had formed at the beginning of this morning, young, non-compliant, possible disturbance, had reorganized itself completely into something that made a very different kind of sense. She walked over to him. Mr. Adeyemi, she said. Jordan looked up from his book. I owe you an apology, Rivera said. When I came to this gate, I was given information that characterized you as a non-compliant passenger. I accepted that characterization. I didn't ask enough questions. Jordan looked at her for a moment. I don't need an apology from you, he said, and his voice was not cold or dismissive. It was simply honest. You were doing your job with what you were given. The people who gave it to you are the ones who had the information and chose what to do with it. Rivera nodded. That seemed right to her. "Are you going to be pressing charges against any of the crew members?" Walsh said. Jordan considered this. "I'm not interested in criminal proceedings," he said. "I'm interested in the right things happening." "Those are different." Rivera's radio crackled. "Operations again. Officer Rivera, please confirm the status of Jordan Adeyemi at Gate 31. Meridian Corporate has requested immediate contact." Rivera looked at Jordan. "Meridian Headquarters wants to know where you are," she said. "I know," Jordan said. "They can wait a few more minutes." He turned a page. Rivera and Walsh exchanged a look. The look contained an entire conversation that they did not need to have out loud. They stepped back slightly, giving Jordan space they should have given him from the beginning. Walsh pulled his jacket straight. Rivera watched the tarmac. The two men in dark suits had reached the base of the jetway stairs and were talking rapidly into their own radios. The morning had taken a turn that would be discussed in the break room for a long time. Walsh said quietly to Rivera, "In 23 years, I have never watched a fuel truck drive away from a plane because of something that happened in first class." Rivera said, "In 7 years, I have never escorted a passenger off a plane who owned the engines in the wings." They stood together in the November light. Jordan turned another page. The satellite phone in the cockpit of Flight 447 ran on a battery backup system that had its own power supply independent of the main electrical grid. When everything else on the aircraft went dark, the satellite phone stayed lit. Captain Dale Merritt had been sitting in his pilot seat for 11 minutes, not touching the controls, not speaking, staring at an instrument panel that showed nothing. First Officer Steve Park had logged a formal objection into the onboard recording system the moment the freeze notification had come through, a careful factual note time-stamped, noting that Merritt's decision to remove a named passenger had preceded the current mechanical issue by approximately 12 minutes, and that Park had not been consulted prior to the decision. He had filed it without telling Merritt. But he had filed it. The satellite phone rang. Merritt picked it up. "Dale." Frank Doyle's voice came through with the particular clarity of a man who has burned through every preliminary and arrived at the pure core of what needs to be said. Sir Merritt started. "We have a power situation that you removed Jordan Adeyemi from Flight 447, Frank Doyle said. "We had a manifest discrepancy and a passenger dispute." "Dale, stop." Merritt stopped. "Jordan Adeyemi is Raymond Adeyemi's grandson. Raymond Adeyemi is the man who has underwritten the entire expansion of this airline for the last 11 years. As of 45 minutes ago, he has frozen every financial instrument that allows us to operate. Our engines, the actual physical engines in the wings of your aircraft, are currently subject to a lease suspension. You are sitting on a plane that does not legally belong to us right now." Do you understand that Merritt looked at the dark instrument panel? He looked at the fuel gauge, full from a truck that had driven away 20 minutes ago. "Yes," Merritt said. "I need you to do something," Frank Doyle said. "I need you to get up from that seat walk through your plane and get off at the jetway. I need you and Victoria Hale to walk to Gate 31, and I need you to find that young man and tell him you are sorry. Not a crew apology, not a company apology, a human apology, from the person who pointed at the door." Merritt was quiet. "Because if Jordan Adeyemi doesn't authorize the release of these assets before close of business today, we are filing for bankruptcy protection. Not next quarter. Today. And 4,000 people who fly our aircraft and load our bags and check in our passengers will go home tonight without jobs." "Do you understand me, Dale?" Merritt said quietly. "Yes, sir." "There is one more thing," Doyle said. "Jordan has 3 conditions. Naomi Park communicated them to me through Raymond's office. First, you and Victoria apologize directly to Jordan on the record in front of witnesses. Second, Preston Albright apologizes directly to Jordan on the record in front of witnesses. Third, Albright leaves the aircraft." Merritt was quiet. "That's it," he said. "That is it," Doyle said. And Dale, given what is at stake, I want to be clear, I would get on my hands and knees and crawl to gate 31 if that's what it took. I suggest you find the same disposition." The phone went quiet. Park had been looking straight ahead through the windshield the entire time. Through the thick glass, the tarmac was a flat gray expanse, and at the far end of the jetway, the gate area was visible, lit with the steady indoor light of the terminal. Park said without turning, "There's a manual door release on panel 7. He had not been part of the decision to remove Jordan Adeyemi. He had been sitting in his seat. He had objected in the log. He was not responsible for what Merritt had done, but he was responsible for what happened next." He looked at the panel. "I'll get the door," Park said. "You should go." Merritt looked at his co-pilot. For a moment, in the strange amber glow of the emergency floor lights, the distance between them was clear. The distance between a man who had made the wrong decision and a man who had done what was available to him when he couldn't prevent it. "Thank you," Merritt said. He stood up. His uniform felt heavier than it had this morning. He walked through the cockpit door, through first class, past the passengers who watched him move toward the front of the plane, with expressions ranging from confusion to something that was beginning to look like understanding. He passed seat 1A. Preston Albright was looking at his phone. "We need to get off the plane," Merritt said to him. Preston looked up. "Both of us," Merritt said. "Now." He kept walking. Victoria Hale was standing in the galley, and when she saw Merritt's face, she already knew. She set down the glass she was holding. She picked up nothing to replace it. They walked to the forward door together. Park released the seal. The cool November air rushed in. The jetway was quiet when Merritt and Victoria stepped through the door. The particular quiet of a space that has been cleared by circumstance rather than design. The two security officers standing back, the gate agent at his desk, watching with the careful attention of someone who has understood that something significant is happening and decided his job today is to witness it accurately. Jordan was where he had been for the last 30 minutes, standing near the glass wall backpack on the floor beside him, the book open in his hands. He had heard the seal on the door behind him open. He finished his sentence. He closed the book. He turned around. Merritt looked different outside the aircraft. The uniform was the same. The silver mustache was the same. But without the cockpit door and the captain's authority and the institutional weight of 212 passengers behind him, Dale Merritt was just a man in his late 50s who had made a bad decision and was now standing in the consequences of it. He walked toward Jordan. He stopped 5 feet away. "Mr. Adeyemi," Merritt said. His voice was low and without the boom it had carried in the cabin. "I made a serious error in judgment this morning. I responded to a situation that I did not investigate properly. I accepted a characterization of you that I had no basis for, and I used my authority to reinforce it. That was wrong. It was specifically wrong because of what I did not see when I looked at you, which was a paying customer who deserved exactly the same service and respect as every other person on my aircraft. I am sorry." Jordan looked at him. He let the apology sit in the air for a moment, the way you let a sound fully resolve before you respond to it. "What did you see when you looked at me?" Jordan said. His voice was the same steady register it had been all morning. Not accusing. Asking. Merritt looked at the floor for 1 second. Then he looked back up, because the floor was the easy direction and easy directions had gotten him here. "I saw a young man in casual clothes who didn't match the image I had in my mind of who should be sitting in that seat," Merritt said. "That was my image's failure, not yours. I understand that now." Victoria stepped forward. She was not wearing her professional expression. The chignon was still perfect. That kind of order takes care of itself, but everything beneath it was unstructured, honest, and tired in the way of someone who has spent an exhausting amount of effort maintaining a posture that has finally given way. She stopped in front of Jordan. "I owe you more than an apology," she said. And I know saying more than an apology is itself a kind of deflection, because words are easier than what I actually owe you." She paused. "When you handed me your boarding pass, I saw it. Your name was there. The confirmation was valid. I knew it, and I went looking for a reason to disagree with it. I found a reason that wasn't a reason. And I used it. Because I looked at you, and I had already decided." She did not look away from him when she said it. Mia Torres, who had followed the crew off the plane when Victoria, belatedly realizing that the presence of a camera at this moment was not something she could change, had essentially stopped trying to prevent it, was standing 6 feet to Jordan's left. Her phone was at her side now, not filming. She watched. Owen Gallagher had followed as well. He stood near the glass wall. Jordan looked at Victoria for a long moment. "Thank you for saying that clearly," he said. "It matters that you said it clearly." Victoria nodded once. Jordan looked at Merritt. "I'm not here to end careers," Jordan said. "I want that to be clear. I don't want to destroy what you've built. But what happened this morning happens every day to people who don't have a grandfather with a satellite phone. They get walked off planes and they never get an apology, and the person who gave their seat away goes back to the galley and makes themselves a coffee and doesn't think about it again. I want to make sure that that isn't what happens after today." Merritt was quiet. He was listening the way a man listens when he knows he has no ground to stand on, and the only honest thing he can do is receive what's being said. "There are going to be formal inquiries," Jordan continued. "An internal review of this flight, a review of how complaints have been handled historically on this route and others. I'll be cooperating with that review. I'll be honest about everything that happened, and I'll expect the same honesty from everyone else here." He looked at Officer Rivera, who was standing with Walsh near the gate agent's desk. "I'll expect it from the crew," Jordan said, "and from anyone who was in a position to do something this morning and didn't." Diego Reyes, who had also followed the crew off the plane and was standing quietly near the jetway door, straightened slightly. Merritt said, "I will do whatever is required of me. I understand what I cost this morning. I'll account for it fully." Victoria said nothing more, but she reached into her uniform jacket pocket and took out Jordan's original boarding pass, which she had retained. He had noticed this and had not asked for it back for reasons that had now become clear. She held it out to him. Jordan looked at it. He took it. He held it for a moment. A piece of paper with a name on it. His name. His seat. $12,000 and 3 weeks of planning, and a morning that had become something none of them had intended it to become. He slid it into his jacket pocket. He looked at Merritt. "There's one more thing I need," Jordan said. Merritt. "Yes." "Preston Albright," Jordan said. "I want him to stand here and say what he said and tell me why it was wrong. Not to make him feel small. Because if a person says something out loud in front of witnesses, it becomes real in a way that silence never allows." Merritt nodded. He picked up his radio. The gate PA system crackled to life. "Mr. Preston Albright, would you please make your way to the forward jetway door? This is a routine request. Mr. Preston Albright." Inside the aircraft, Preston heard his name. He heard routine request and recognized it for exactly what it was, the language people use when the situation is anything but routine and everyone in the room knows it. He had been sitting in seat 1A with his hands flat on the armrests for the last 8 minutes. Around him, the cabin had the atmosphere of a room full of people all silently watching the same slow-motion event unfold. The phones were out. The articles were being read. The video Mia Torres's TikTok, which had now passed 12 million views, was circulating through the cabin through the shared Wi-Fi network. Someone in 3C had turned their screen slightly so it was just visible from the next row, the way people make things available without technically showing them. Preston had seen it. He had watched on a small screen at 35,000 feet, except they were not at 35,000 feet. They were on the ground, had been on the ground for an hour, might be on the ground for considerably longer. The footage of himself in this same cabin earlier this morning, pointing at Jordan Adeyemi with his finger extended and his face flushed and his mouth forming the words, "I am telling you man to man, I need that seat." He had watched himself say, "I don't know how you ended up in that seat." He had watched the look on his own face when he said it, the certainty. The complete, unexamined certainty of a man who had never once in his life had to consider whether his certainty might have a root cause other than being correct. He stood up. He straightened his jacket. He walked to the forward door and onto the jetway. He saw Merritt. He saw Victoria. He saw Rivera and Walsh. He saw Owen Gallagher standing by the wall. He saw Mia Torres with her phone at her side. He saw Jordan. He stopped. The jetway had a quality of stillness that good silence always has. It was not empty. It was full of everything that had been said and decided in the last hour, layered in the air like weather. Merritt said Jordan has a request. Preston looked at Jordan. Jordan was the same as he had been at 6:45 this morning. Same hoodie, same backpack. Same book, the corner of the cover visible above his jacket pocket. Same quality of stillness in his face that Preston had read this morning as passivity, because it was the only framework he had been working with. He read it differently now. It was not passivity. It had never been passivity. It was the particular quality of a person who does not need external validation to know who they are and therefore cannot be touched by the opinions of people who have not bothered to look properly. Preston Albright had never in his life been read accurately by someone 24 years old in a gray hoodie. He was being read accurately now. "I know why I'm here," Preston said. His voice had lost its bulk. "Then say it," Jordan said simply. "Not to hurt you. Because truth in a room full of witnesses is the only thing that doesn't disappear." Preston looked at the floor. Then he looked up. His jaw was tight with the effort of this, not the words, but the position. The having to stand here and say them. "I was wrong," Preston said. "I looked at you, and I decided you didn't belong in that seat before you said a single word. I used my relationship with this airline to pressure the crew. I called you—" He paused. "I implied things about you that had nothing to do with anything real." He met Jordan's eyes. "I am sorry. I behaved badly, and I knew it. And I kept going anyway because I thought I could." The jetway was very quiet. Jordan looked at him for a moment. "Why did you think you could?" Jordan said. Preston said nothing for a moment. Then in a voice that was quieter than anything he had produced all morning. "Because I always have." The words landed with the particular weight of a truth that cost something to say. Jordan nodded slowly. "I believe you," Jordan said, "and I want you to keep what you just said with you. Not as shame, as information, about where you've been and what you need to change, because shame is private and it gets quieter over time. But information you can actually use." Preston looked at him. He nodded once. He seemed to have nothing more to say that was worth saying. Jordan looked at Merritt. "He's not flying on this aircraft?" Jordan said. Merritt agreed. Preston turned and walked back onto the plane. Not to his seat, to gather his carry-on. He walked through the cabin of 200 people who had been watching the TikTok for the last 40 minutes and who were very quiet as he moved through them toward the rear exit. Nobody clapped. Nobody said a word. The silence was louder than anything else that had happened all morning. This section continues the scene expanding on the witnesses, the aftermath inside the cabin, and Diego's formal statement. Inside the cabin, after Preston had retrieved his bag and made his way off the aircraft through the rear air stairs, the operations team had arranged a ground exit for him, specifically sparing the remaining passengers the second walkthrough. Something shifted. It was not dramatic. There was no announcement. No crew member stood at the front of the cabin and narrated what had just happened. But the space left by Preston's absence, combined with the space left by the conversation people had been watching unfold through phone screens for the last 40 minutes, created a particular kind of atmospheric change. Owen Gallagher returned to his seat. He opened his laptop. He didn't type anything immediately. He sat with it open on the tray table and looked at the seat back in front of him. He thought about 10 minutes earlier. About Jordan walking down the aisle with his chin level. About himself sitting in his seat laptop open watching it happen and taking 11 minutes to stand up. He closed the laptop again. He pressed the call button above his seat. Diego Reyes came down the aisle. Owen said, "I want to make a formal witness statement. Whatever inquiry process is going to happen, I want to be on record. Everything I saw from the beginning." Diego looked at him. He had his clipboard in his hand. "I'm making one too," Diego said. "I've already written the first part down." He showed Owen the clipboard. There were 2 pages of handwriting, clear and careful, beginning with the time stamp 6:48 a.m. Owen looked at it. He said, "You wrote this while it was happening." Diego said, "I wrote it after he walked out. I didn't write it while it was happening because I didn't do anything while it was happening. Writing it afterward was the least I could do." Owen read the first paragraph. He handed the clipboard back. "Send me a copy," Owen said. "Whatever form that takes." Diego nodded. He walked to the front of the cabin. He looked at seat 1. Empty. Now Preston's Financial Times still folded on the tray table. The crystal glass Victoria had been about to fill, still in the galley, and he did something he had been wanting to do for the last hour. He picked up the Financial Times. He put it in the recycling. He took the crystal glass from the galley and put it in the cleaning rack. Then he went to seat 1A and straightened the headrest cover and folded the blanket that hadn't been used and placed it back in its compartment, and did everything a flight attendant does to prepare a first-class seat for a passenger. It was an empty gesture in one sense. The passenger wasn't coming back. But Diego Reyes was 29 years old, and this was only his first year on the transatlantic route, and he understood in the way that people understand things when they are young enough to still feel the full force of what they haven't done yet, that gestures matter. Not because they undo things, because they point at the direction you're choosing to move. He stood beside 1A. He looked at the tarmac through the window. The 2 men in dark suits were gone. The gate area was visible. Jordan's still there, he thought, though the angle wasn't quite right. Diego thought about what Jordan had said in the jetway. The thing about people who don't have a grandfather with a satellite phone, who get walked off planes and never get an apology. He had been one of the people who walked them off. Not today. Today he had been in the galley. But other days. Other flights. Other passengers, whose certainty he had questioned without asking himself why he was questioning it. He stood beside seat 1A for a moment longer than was necessary. Then he walked back to the galley and picked up his clipboard. He added a 3rd page. Back on the jetway, Owen's account of the morning was being formally received by Officer Rivera, who had produced a notebook from her jacket pocket and was writing in it with the focused attention of someone who understood that she had not done her job correctly at the beginning of this morning and was now doing it very carefully. Walsh was on his radio communicating with operations. Mia Torres was sitting on her phone watching The View count on the TikTok climb. She had added 3 captions since posting. First, he had a valid ticket the whole time, then his grandfather owns the airline's credit line, and most recently they just apologized on the jetway. I was there. I have all of it. She looked up from the phone. Jordan was standing near the glass wall again. He was looking at the tarmac. The fuel truck was still parked away from the aircraft. The plane wasn't going anywhere. Mia said, "Are you okay?" Jordan looked at her. He thought about the question. Not the surface answer, he was physically fine, uninjured, unhurt in any way that would show up in a medical report. But she hadn't asked that. She was 19, and she had filmed the whole thing, and she had stayed when she could have left, and she had earned the real answer. "Honestly," Jordan said, "I've been okay since about 3 minutes into the conversation in there. Once I understood exactly what was happening, I was okay." Mia: "How do you do that, Jordan? Somebody spent a long time teaching me that the opinions of people who haven't looked at you properly don't carry any weight." Mia was quiet for a moment. "I'm going to remember that," she said. "Jordan Good." He checked his watch. He picked up his backpack. He had a phone call to make. Jordan pressed Naomi's number. She answered on the first ring. "Release the credit facility," Jordan said. "The merger can proceed." A brief pause on the other end. "You're certain," Naomi said. "I'm certain. 3 things have happened. The crew apologized on the record in front of witnesses. Preston Albright apologized on the record in front of witnesses. He's off the aircraft. That's what I asked for. The fuel authorization. Release it. Park can fly the aircraft. And Naomi, I want the formal review of this flight's handling to proceed regardless. The release of assets isn't a cancellation of accountability, it's a separation of issues." "Understood," Naomi said. "I'll confirm to Doyle's office." "One more thing," Jordan said. "The first officer on that flight, Steve Park. He logged a formal objection before the power cut. I want that on record as material to the review." "Already noted," Naomi said. "Your grandfather made the same call 10 minutes ago." Jordan smiled. Of course he had. "Thank you," he said. He ended the call. Officer Rivera had been close enough to hear the end of the conversation. She looked at Jordan with the expression of someone who was taking a careful inventory of everything she had witnessed this morning and revising several columns. "The airline is cleared to operate," she said. "The assets are released," Jordan said. "Captain Park, the first officer, can fly the plane. Rivera. You're not going to reboard?" Jordan looked at the plane one more time. Through the gate window, he could see the tarmac crew beginning to move back toward the aircraft, the re-engagement of the ground operation, the fuel truck beginning to reverse toward the wing again. "No," Jordan said. "I'll take the next flight. British Airways, 10:15. Rivera. We can arrange priority, Jordan." "That's okay. I'll get in the standard line." Rivera looked at him. She almost said something and then stopped, because what she was going to say was, "But you don't need to," and she understood that was exactly the point. Owen Gallagher had come off the plane to give his statement. He was standing near the gate door now. When Jordan looked over, Owen gave him a single nod. The particular nod of one adult to another that doesn't require words and means. "I saw it. I said it. I'm sorry it took me 11 minutes. Jordan returned the nod. He turned to Officer Walsh, who had been standing back. "If there's anything further that needs to be documented from me today," Jordan said, "here is my contact through legal counsel." He pulled a card from his jacket pocket and held it out. Naomi had told him once always carry the card. You never know when a morning becomes a document. Walsh took it. Jordan picked up his backpack. He slung it over one shoulder. He looked at the jetway one more time, at the sealed door and the dim light of the emergency system still running in the aircraft beyond it. 12 minutes, he thought. That was all it had taken to freeze $1.7 billion. And now, on the other side of those 12 minutes, a man in his late 50s who ran an airline was going to have to explain to his board why the most important merger in company history had come within a single phone call of total collapse. A captain who had run this route for 12 years was going to sit in a cockpit that no longer felt like a kingdom. A flight attendant who had been certain she could read a room was going to spend a long time unlearning the certainty. And Jordan Adeyemi was going to the British Airways counter to get in the standard line. He started walking. He did not look back. By the time the tug driver reattached the tow bar to Flight 447's nose gear and the fuel truck rolled back to its position at the left wing. Mia Torres's TikTok had 47 million views. She was sitting in the gate area outside the aircraft, watching the count tick upward on her phone, with an expression that was somewhere between disbelief and the particular calm of a person who had simply done what they always did. Pointed the camera at something true, and was now watching the world respond to it on a scale that had nothing to do with her and everything to do with what she had pointed the camera at. The video itself was 6 minutes and 43 seconds long. It was not edited, it was not captioned or stylized or scored with music. It was simply what it was, an unbroken record from the moment Preston Albright's voice first rose in the cabin to the moment Jordan Adeyemi walked down the aisle with his chin level and his shoulders back and his gaze fixed on the door at the end of the world he had been told to leave. The footage did not try to make a point. It didn't need to. The footage was the point. Within the aircraft, which had now been fully powered down and repowered in sequence as operations restored the electrical systems, the lights coming back on to a cabin that felt different than it had before the darkness, passengers began receiving the same messages from the outside world that always arrive when the outside world has been watching something you were in the middle of. A woman in 6B received a text from her sister. "Are you on that Meridian flight? It's everywhere." A man in 8A opened Twitter and saw his flight number trending in the top 3 worldwide. A teenage boy in 11C who had been traveling with headphones in since before boarding and had missed most of the morning's drama took the headphones out because the person beside him was showing him something on a screen and watched 6 minutes and 43 seconds of footage shot from 2 rows ahead of where he had been sitting. He said to the person beside him, "That was on this plane." The person beside him said, "That was on this plane." In first class, the cabin had a different quality. The people in these rows had been present for the original event. They had seen the video being made. They had watched Jordan walk out and Merritt follow and Preston return without his luggage. They had experienced the whole morning in 3 dimensions, and now they were watching its 2-dimensional version be consumed by 47 million people. Owen Gallagher returned to his seat, watched the view count climb. 42 million, 44 million, 47. He thought about the moment he stood up and asked Victoria about the policy basis for Jordan's removal. He thought about how he had waited 11 minutes before doing it. He thought about what Jordan had said on the jetway about people who don't have a satellite phone to call, and he thought, "I had a voice the whole time, and I used it 9 minutes later than I should have." He opened his laptop. He opened a new email to his managing partner. Subject line: "Something I want to tell you about this morning." He wrote 3 paragraphs. He sent it before he could reconsider. Diego Reyes stood in the forward galley with his clipboard and watched the cabin through the curtain. The passengers were reading watching processing. Some were on their own phones. Some were looking out the windows at the tarmac where the ground crew were completing the pre-departure checks that had been interrupted 45 minutes ago. The aircraft was going to fly. The engines were legal. The fuel was authorized. The seat in 1A empty was going to fly across the Atlantic without the person who had purchased it and had every right to sit in it. Diego looked at the seat. He thought about the formal statement he had written. 3 pages now. He had added a section about the pattern he had observed over 8 months of flying this route. The shorthand, the assumptions, the unspoken way the cabin sometimes organized itself around who was considered to belong and who needed to justify it. He had not reported any of this before. He was reporting it now. On the tarmac, the PA in the terminal announced a boarding call. Not for flight 447. That would come in a few minutes. For the British Airways, 10:15 to London Heathrow. In the gate area for that flight 2 rows from the front, Jordan Adeyemi stood in the standard line, backpack on, book in hand, boarding pass on his phone. He looked like exactly what he was, a young man waiting to board a flight. The gate agent scanned the pass ahead of him. The line moved forward. Jordan stepped up. He handed over his phone. The agent scanned it, smiled. "Have a good flight." Jordan, "Thank you." He walked down the jetway. Flight 447 arrived at London Heathrow 6 hours and 40 minutes after its delayed departure from JFK. It did not arrive at a standard gate. The instructions from the Civil Aviation Authority had come through while the aircraft was somewhere over the Irish Sea. A quiet formal communication through the official channel that Flight 447 was to hold at a remote stand on the North Apron upon arrival. The stand was typically used for cargo operations, technical holds, and flights flagged for immediate inspection. The stand was currently flanked by 2 Metropolitan Police vehicles and 1 unmarked car that had the particular unremarkableness of cars that are never actually unremarkable. Captain Park, Steve. Park First Officer, until 6 hours ago now the acting commander of record after Merritt had been relieved of flight duties pending review brought the aircraft in cleanly. He had been flying since before 6 in the morning, and it had been the longest morning of his career in aviation. He landed the plane the way he had landed every plane in 22 years of flying, with precise, unhurried attention to every instrument and frequency and altitude call that the job required. When the wheels touched tarmac, there was no applause from the cabin. There was silence. The particular silence of people who had spent 6 hours processing the same morning and had arrived each in their own way at a version of the same conclusion. The doors opened. The Metropolitan Police boarded. They walked with the measured purpose of officers who have received detailed briefings and know exactly where they are going. The lead officer was a woman, compact, gray-eyed, the expression of someone who has seen complicated things and takes careful notes about them. She had a folder. She consulted it once as she entered first class. She stopped at row 1. Preston Albright had spent the flight in seat 2. A Victoria had moved him there before the delayed departure, unwilling to allow the specific symbolism of him in the seat, and he had not spoken, eaten, or read his Financial Times since takeoff. He had stared at the seat back in front of him for 6 hours. "Mr. Albright," the officer said, "we have a formal caution to issue under the Public Order Act regarding your conduct aboard this aircraft earlier today. I'd ask you to accompany us." Preston stood. He looked like a man who had spent 6 hours in the company of a decision he couldn't unmake. He straightened his jacket out of habit, the jacket being one of the last things over which he had any control, and he walked. The cabin watched him go in silence, not a hostile silence, not a triumphant one, just the silence of a room full of people witnessing a consequence. Victoria Hale was interviewed on the air bridge by 2 CAA representatives. Her aviation license was flagged for review pending the outcome of the formal inquiry. She handed over her ID badge when asked. She did not argue. She answered every question directly and completely the way she had not answered Jordan Adeyemi's questions that morning, and the contrast between those 2 conversations would stay with her for a long time. Captain Park sat in the cockpit until every passenger had deplaned. He looked at the log system. The formal objection he had filed at 6:53 a.m. was still there, time-stamped, unaltered. His whole action had consisted of 11 keystrokes and 1 sentence: "I formally object to the removal of a named passenger from this flight without verified safety grounds." 11 keystrokes. He thought if more people found 11 keystrokes within themselves at the right moment, there would be fewer mornings like this one. He gathered his flight bag. He walked off the aircraft. Owen Gallagher was among the last to deplane. He walked through the gate through the terminal and found his ground transportation. In the car, he opened his email. His managing partner had replied. The reply said, "I'm glad you said something. Even if it took 11 minutes. We should talk about why 11 minutes felt so long." Owen looked out the car window at the gray London afternoon. He typed back, "Yes. Let's talk about that." Mia Torres, who had transferred flights at Heathrow for a connection to Madrid, posted a second video from the transit area. It was 30 seconds long. It showed her face, no filter, slightly tired morning still in her eyes. She said, "I didn't know who he was when I started recording. I just knew it was wrong. That's still why it mattered. That's still the whole point." The second video hit 8 million views in 4 hours. 6 months moved through the lives of everyone in this story in ways that were permanent and quiet and true. Victoria Hale did not return to aviation. The formal review had concluded without criminal charges, but her aviation authorization was suspended for 18 months, a professional consequence that in practice functioned as an ending. She found work at a retail boutique in Westchester County, managing a small team and learning slowly a different way of seeing the people who walked through the door. Her first week, a young black man in track clothes came in and looked at a jacket on the wall without touching it. She watched herself begin to watch him, and then, instead of watching, she walked over and said, "That one's a good cut. Do you want to see it in your size?" He said yes. She helped him find it. She rang him up. She said, "Have a good day," and meant it, and when he left, she stood at the register for a moment and understood that this was what she should have always been doing, and that the only difference was she had needed to lose something real before she found it. Captain Dale Merritt surrendered his commercial pilot's license for review in January. The formal inquiry concluded that his conduct on Flight 447 had violated Meridian Airways' own passenger rights policy in 3 distinct ways. His license was suspended for 14 months. He appealed, and then 2 months into the appeal process, he withdrew it. A colleague who called to check in received an email in reply that said simply, "I decided I'd rather start getting it right than spend more time defending getting it wrong." Preston Albright left Orion Logistics by the end of the week following the flight. He spent 2 months consulting for a smaller firm that did not have his name on anything. He has, by several accounts, become measurably quieter in rooms than he used to be. Whether this represents internal change or simply the recalibration of a man who now understands where visible entitlement leads is a question only time will answer honestly. Frank Doyle restructured Meridian Airways under new governance terms required by the reconstituted merger agreement. $1.7 billion was eventually transferred in a revised deal that included a new independent passenger equity board, a formal body with real authority to review crew conduct flag patterns and mandate change. Mia Torres was invited to join as a public advocate. She accepted on the condition that she could continue her studies concurrently and that she would always be identified as a witness, not a brand ambassador. Owen Gallagher accepted. He became the board's first chair. Diego Reyes was promoted to senior cabin crew 6 months later. His formal statement had been cited 4 times in the inquiry as one of the clearest and most complete accounts of the morning's events. At his promotion review, his supervisor noted he understands what the job requires, and he does it even when it's uncomfortable. That's rare. First Officer Steve Park became Captain Steve Park in March. His first transatlantic command departed from JFK on a Tuesday morning. The weather was clear. The flight was on time. Jordan flew to London the same day he had originally planned to go. He arrived 6 hours later than scheduled on a British Airways flight in seat 3C, a window, which was what he liked, and he sat and watched the city of London materialize below him through the November clouds, and he thought about the morning and what it had cost and what it had produced, and he felt something he had not expected to feel, not satisfaction exactly, and not exhaustion, but something in the vicinity of both that lives in the specific territory of having stood for something that was yours to stand for and having not let go of it. Raymond Adeyemi met him at arrivals. The trust documents were signed that afternoon. 3 months after the morning at Gate 31, Jordan Adeyemi stood at the check-in counter of Terminal 4 at JFK International Airport. The airline was called Beacon Air. The signage was matte black with gold lettering, clean simple, the aesthetic of something that had decided it didn't need to announce itself loudly. It had been formed from the reorganized assets of Meridian's most stable routes acquired through Adeyemi Holdings during the restructuring, and it had been operating for 11 days. Jordan was not the public face of Beacon Air. He hadn't attended the press launch. He had no social media presence, no interviews scheduled, no interest in being a story. He was a 24-year-old man who was going to London for a second meeting about a trust document, and he needed to get on a plane. He handed his boarding pass to the gate agent at the counter. She scanned it. She looked at the screen. She looked up at him. She recognized the name. Of course she did. 11 days of working for Beacon Air meant 11 days of orientation materials that had prominently described the events of the previous November and the founding principles of the airline principles that had been articulated simply: every person who buys a ticket belongs in the seat they purchased, and that fact does not require any supplementary evidence. She started to reach for her phone to call the duty manager the VIP protocol, the standard escalation for notable passengers. Jordan shook his head slightly. The headshake was small. It was unmistakable. "Just a passenger," he said. She stopped reaching for the phone. She smiled. Not the assembled professional smile, the other kind, the one that comes when you are in the presence of something that makes sense. "Safe travels." "Mr. Adeyemi," she said. "Seat 1. A is ready." Jordan nodded. He picked up his backpack. He walked down the jetway with the unhurried pace of someone who had learned long ago, had been carefully, lovingly taught that you do not need to walk quickly when you know exactly where you're going. He had the window seat. He had his book. He had 37,000 feet of sky ahead of him, and somewhere below it, a city where someone was waiting to see him, and a document that needed a signature and a future that was simply quietly his. "I've been thinking about this story for weeks, and there's one moment I keep coming back to. Not the freeze, not the apology on the jetway, not even the look on Preston Albright's face when he realized what a single phone call had cost him. The moment I keep coming back to is Jordan walking down that aisle. 12 rows, 15 seconds, every eye in the cabin on him. And his chin never moved. His shoulders never moved. He just walked, and you could see on every frame of that footage that he was carrying something the rest of the room couldn't quite name, a kind of gravity that doesn't come from a title or a suit or knowing someone powerful. It comes from having been told a long time ago by someone who loved you. You carry nothing of theirs. I think about the people who go through what Jordan went through and don't have a grandfather with a satellite phone. The ones who walk off the plane and never get an apology. The ones the inquiry never reaches and the video never follows and the 47 million views never find. Those stories end in silence, and the people who created the silence go back and make themselves a coffee and don't think about it again. That is the real story underneath this one. Not the billions. The silence. So here is what I want to leave you with. You don't need a satellite phone. You don't need a merger on the line. What you need, what Jordan had that no one could confiscate, is the understanding that the dignity you were born with is not subject to review by someone who hasn't bothered to look at you properly. They can move you from the seat. They cannot move you from yourself. And on the days when it feels like they almost have remembered this, Jordan Adeyemi sat down in seat 1. He read his book and did not look down once. And the morning still ended with the truth. The truth always takes longer to arrive than the lie, but it always lands. If this story reached something in you, if you've ever been told with a look, a word, or a gesture that you didn't belong somewhere you had every right to be, I want to hear from you. Drop your city or your country in the comments. Tell me what you would have done. Tell me what you've done. Tell me what you're still working up to. And if you believe that a ticket, a boarding pass, a name on a manifest, and a human being with their chin held up should be enough, hit like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to hear it today, because this story has 47 million views. But the next version of it, The one that ends before a freight of consequences has to fall. That one starts with one person in a cabin deciding to say something 9 minutes earlier than they otherwise would have. Be that person. We'll be here for the next story.